Okay, I feel like 2024 was a wild year for product. My LinkedIn feed was just filled with like, product is dead and AI's taking over and a whole bunch of stuff like that. But I want to ignore all the clickbait tiles and polarizing claims. What I actually want to do is I went back and I looked at all the content that I created. I looked at my top performing posts, my newsletter, the YouTube channel, and all of the things that my clients were struggling with during 2024. And what I've done is I've compiled a list of top 5 challenges that product people like you faced in 2024. And in this video, I want to do a deep dive into each one of them. I want to provide you a whole bunch of helpful links to help you overcome these challenges, because I'm sure many of these are going to resonate with you. And I want this video to be actionable and not just another clickbaity look back at 2024 and AI and product is dead and blah, blah, blah. We will do a little bit of that in my next video. I'm going to do another one where we'll look forwards at 2025. We'll do some predictions. I'll be totally wrong, but we'll look at some of the trends that are going on. But this video, actionable, focused on these top 5. On that note, let's get into the first one. I feel like I need to start this with a disclaimer that, of course, my data is biased. The clients I work with, there's an element of selection bias with the clients I work with my audience, the people who watch these videos, the people who read my newsletter, that type of stuff. Of course, individual experiences may differ, right? So with that said, the number one theme for 2024 was product strategy. I probably could have titled this as being more commercial, the rise of the commercial product manager. But to be honest, this has been a trend that I've observed for some time. If you think about what Brian Chesky was trying to do with the product role at Airbnb, and there was a bit of residual on that at the beginning of the year, but he was trying to do exactly this. What they did was they didn't get rid of the product role. They just expanded it. He gave them more end-to-end responsibility, more responsibility over go-to-market and commercial outcomes. I actually just see this as a recorrect. The original product managers owned their product lines end to end. They owned it from idea to pricing to packaging to promotion. They owned the commercial outcomes too. So they owned everything, right? What has happened though is over time, product managers and really commercial enterprises just became far too inwards focused. Or at least this is what I believe happened. What this meant was they forgot about the customer. They started to focus far too heavily on those commercial gains. And Qualtrics more recently coined this the experience gap. This experience gap was really what startups exploited. They focused heavily on delighting their customers, and that gave them a competitive advantage over the incumbents, right? Now, this led to the rise of all the big Silicon Valley tech companies that we know, but it also reshaped product management. We saw the pendulum swing from companies being very focused on commercial outcomes to ones being more focused on the customer. And this meant that product did the same thing. And I actually believe all of this happened for a good reason. I think we really needed, especially at that point in time, we really needed to put the customer back at the center of product, back at the center of business. And I think this has created a whole new wave and a whole new industry of just good products and better businesses. But what this has also done is it's created a whole new breed of product managers who, in some cases, have been completely devoid of any commercial responsibility. What I think is starting to happen now is that strategy and business acumen will now become the new thing that separates product managers apart. We saw that definitely this year. More and more of my clients wanted and demanded product people with commercial acumen. They didn't just want someone who can, listen to the customer and unpack their needs and really drive, good customer outcomes. They wanted business outcomes as well. And I think the macroeconomical climate was at least one of the things that really drove this. If you want a place to start with product strategy, because this could be a 2-hour video just on product strategy, I pinned a bunch of my top posts on product strategy this year in the comments. So you find the pinned comment and there'll be a bunch of links inside that. So go check them out. As something just really small and easy and actionable for you to take away right now, I would highly recommend doing product teardowns. You can watch my product teardown that I did on Milk Run up here that I did last year when they went into a mission here in Australia. But a product teardown, and you can do this just in your everyday practice, right? Is really just analyzing what choices did they make? How would I change it? What is their strategy based on the moves and the decisions that they're making? Try and decompose that strategy. Try and understand what this product is doing, what's it's trying to achieve, those types of things. This is a great way to really get more reps in and to build your skill in this space, because the reality is you don't have infinite amounts of opportunity to do product strategy. You're probably going to do this infrequently inside your career. So one of the challenges that we have is, how do I build this skill when it's so infrequent? Well, one of the ways that I really do this, and I encourage a lot of my clients to do as well, is to do product teardowns. Okay, this one surprised me, but product roadmaps was the second top theme for me this year. Perhaps again, if I really think about it, being influenced by the economical shift. Of course, if you reboot your strategy, then a new roadmap will surely follow next. But it was something I found myself spending a lot of time on clarifying, and that was really, what the hell is a product roadmap? And even more specifically, I spent a lot of time with my clients, and I did a very successful webinar. In fact, it was my most successful webinar of the year, talking about the difference between a roadmap and a plan. So to just clarify all of this, a framing that I've been using for a while now is this one. So roadmaps, they are outcome orientated, they're customer centric, and they're really focused on a long time horizon. They are generally more flexible, they're iterative, and they're focused on describing the what and the why, not necessarily the how and the when. And a roadmap is primarily a communication tool. It's your tool to start to visualize your strategy as a sequence of events, and to be able to use that in order to communicate. We're doing this and then we're doing that, and we're trying to achieve these outcomes, and we're chasing these opportunities, right? Now, plans, on the other hand, are much more short-term focused. They look at a nearer time horizon. You can have long plans, but generally with a much shorter time horizon, and they're much more static. They're sequential. They start to focus on things like dependencies, and really they're describing the how and the when. Because if we want to plan and we want to deal with things like dependencies, we need to know how we're going to do things, who's doing what before when, and when, right? Like, we get this done and then you can do this and that type of stuff. And as a result of all that, that is very internally focused. It's a tool for us, not for our customers. It's for us to plan, right? It's a planning tool. And as a result of all this, it is much more outcome and activity focused. I actually had this little litmus test that I said quite recently when I did a thing about roadmaps and plans for a client. I actually said, like, if your roadmap is describing things like design this or build this or test this, they are activities. If you're using activity words in your roadmap, then you probably have a plan, not a roadmap. Because if you added discovery, design, build, test, etc., etc., etc. if you added all of that up, what are you trying to achieve? That feature, that functionality, that problem that you're trying to solve, that outcome, those things are things that should be a roadmap. So we would describe the thing, not the series of events and activities that we do in order to achieve it, right? So I'm not going to recap a whole 40-minute webinar on building effective product roadmaps. You can find that up here. I'll throw it in there, but I also have a link to that webinar and my newsletter post that I did on roadmaps down in that pinned comment as well, along with some other helpful resources. As some actionable things though, because I don't want to just leave it at that. I want to give you some things inside this video so you don't need to go digging on other things. Some key things that I think about with roadmaps are this. I think about the cone of uncertainty. Now, I draw the cone of uncertainty backwards when I do this, and people are going to shoot me down. But really what I'm trying to describe is maybe not even the cone of uncertainty, to be honest. I'm trying to describe the fact that the further something is in the future, the more inherent uncertainty there is. The shorter term something is, the less uncertainty there is. So a framing I use is this. If you ask me, where am I going to be on September the 22nd, 2027, I'm probably going to be wrong, because who knows? I might not be in the country. I might be on holidays. I might be, not at home. I might be in the office. I might be giving a talk. I don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty around that. But if you ask me where I'm going to be tomorrow, I'm going to be home. I'm going to be enjoying, the holiday period with my family. But there's a lot less uncertainty around that. Unless something drastically changes or happens, or an emergency happens, that's going to be where I'm going to be tomorrow. I'm going to be home enjoying my time with my family, right? So I always think about that, which means that when we do our roadmaps, we need to bake in flexibility. We need to bake in this inherent uncertainty. And we can do that in two ways. We can do it with the items that we put on the roadmaps. One of the ways that I like to think about this is that, in the near term, it's okay to have things like features because we know what we're going to build because we've probably done discovery on it and we're like, hey, this solution is what we're going to deliver, or this experiment is what we're going to do. So the things in the near term can be much more concrete. But as we move further and further out, things become less concrete, they become more vague. And this is where we start to have things like opportunities or problem spaces that we'll like to look into inside of our roadmap. And then we start to have things like goals or like longer term goals or milestones that we'll like to achieve. Like we want to expand internationally, right? Like that's a very big, hairy problem that we don't know where internationally are we going to start. We don't know how, and we don't need to. I don't need to say that we're going to move into, Europe next. Maybe that's the logical thing, but I don't need to say that. I just need to say international expansion. And that's okay for a roadmap, especially something that's really in a far horizon. And as we get closer to it, we'll be able to decompose that, do discovery, and work out how exactly should we, expand internationally. And that might turn into Europe, that might turn into a specific country in Europe, that might turn into specific things that we need to do to internationalize our product in that area, or specific problem spaces that we know about internationalizing it. Man, that's a hard word to say, but you get my point, right? And we allow things to become more concrete over time. The second way that we can bake in this inherent uncertainty is to just avoid dates, right? And now this goes without saying. Typically, the most common way to do this is we just do the classic now, next, later. But if you need to still have the concept of dates, or time, I should say, without actually using hard specific dates, I encourage putting timeframes down, but doing them as date ranges, right? So what I recommend is doing like quarters, and then we start to allow things to become broader again, following that cone of uncertainty. So we want to go from quarter, maybe another quarter if you really want to, and then we want to go to like the second half of the year, and then we want to go to next year, and then we want to go to beyond, right? 2027 and beyond. We want to just be able to allow things to get broader and broader over time. That's another great way to be able to have that inherent flexibility and to bake that uncertainty in without giving or committing to any specific dates. So hopefully that's some helpful hints around road mapping. If you really need to or want to dive deeper into this topic, watch that full webinar on product roadmaps, and a product roadmaps course will be coming to Product Pathway soon, sometime in the second half of 2025 is the time horizon that I will give you for that on the roadmap. Breaking down outcomes. I want to share a real story to illustrate this one. I've been coaching this founder for the last couple of months. He's trying really hard to be that leader that we all know and love, someone who empowers the teams with problems, not solutions, but it wasn't working. He was struggling. He didn't feel like it was moving the needle. The teams weren't really focused on the most important problems, at least from his perspective. They were going down these rabbit holes. They were spinning their wheels and just kind of stuck all around. Well, I spent some time with him on several things, but one of my points of call was to look at how was he framing those problems? Like, what were the problems he was given to the team? And as most of you are probably familiar with, he was doing the classic like team objectives model where he was framing problems as like team objectives, often in the form of OKRs. To give you an example of the current state, here was one of the objectives that he had been given to the team. One of the teams was given this one, which was maximize users' success when onboarding. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that statement. For example, what does he mean by maximize? And what do you mean by success? But more fundamental to the ambiguous words that are used there, the core issue that I see here is the fact that this objective is just far too broad. Like if you think about it this way, there is probably over 100 different things that the team could do to improve onboarding, right? They could do minor flow changes, they could change colors, they could rearrange things, they could do, cosmetic things, they could improve accessibility. Like there's a lot of things inside that. So I wasn't surprised when I actually spoke to the team and they were feeling equally as frustrated and lost in the process because they're given this very broad thing and they're like, I don't know where to start. Now, there's an element here that I'll just touch on, which is like very experienced product people would be able to handle this ambiguity. They'll be able to take it, they'll be able to break it down. They'll work out what, if I take this big problem and I work out what the most important problems are inside this problem, but that is also based on the competency level of your people. And even if somebody was doing that, that is still breaking down the outcome, which is exactly the theme that I'm trying to talk about here. So Back to the founder though. His team, he didn't really have any product people. He was playing that product role. They're a small startup. So, he didn't really have people who were doing that for him. So it was kind of up to him. And he's obviously also building his own competency in these skills, and hence why I was coaching him. So I asked him a question. It was a basic question. I said, based on your data, experience, your knowledge, the context, everything that you know, what do you believe is the most significant barrier to successful onboarding? And he immediately replied with import. I was like, okay, that's fascinating. What do you mean by import? Import's a step inside the onboarding flow. You don't need to understand the whole product to understand the story, right? But I said fascinating. Okay, tell me more about import. Why is import the biggest barrier? And he said, well, we have a high failure rate during import. Like when users, during the onboarding process, they need to import their data, and a lot of the time that fails. I was like, well, great. Okay. What about if we reframe the problem? We got the team focused on just reducing the number of failed imports. And what we're doing there is narrowing that problem space. And he ended up revising the team objective to this one, which is to reduce the number of imports that fail during onboarding. Now, I also think this is a great example about why companies can't suddenly just start using OKRs and expect amazing results, because there's a real skill in setting objectives at the right level and creating focus for the team. What you're trying to aim for here is to think big and work small, right? To use John Cutler's words, not think big and work big. So an example would be to take revenue and then to break it down into conversion and retention and other kind of value drivers, and then to take conversion and to break it down into the number of leads and to reducing drop off and improving onboarding, and then to break that down, etc., etc. I really love KPI trees for this, right? I think they're a great tool to help you decompose an outcome or decompose a problem space. And it doesn't need to be a perfect KPI tree. It could just be a tree diagram of you decomposing the problem. But what you're doing is you're actually modeling out your hypothesis. You're actually saying, if I can influence this small driver here, this is going to have a lead-in impact to this, which is going to have an impact to this, which is going to eventually kind of lead to revenue, right? Because one of the other problems with big problem spaces is there are often lag in things. It takes a long time for us to see the results of it, right? So we're actually trying to influence leading indicators and to break that down in the hope that they will lead to that lag in business or, larger impact that we have. This is so valuable on so many levels doing this. I did a whole talk on this topic. You can watch that talk up here if you're interested. Again, in that pinned comment, I'm going to have links to some of my most popular posts of the year, which were based on this topic, as well as to that video. A very, very important one for me. I do not see product managers and product leaders do enough. I would definitely recommend go and check out those links and to learn more about it and to really just practice it, right? Practice decomposing things, breaking down the problem space before you even get to the solution. Continuous discovery. Yep, that's right. Product managers are still trying to master continuous discovery in 2024. This one is also linked to the previous point about breaking down outcomes. I want to just sketch something for you in a minute to just illustrate this, because it's very hard to do continuous discovery if you're still dealing with these really big problems. And breaking the problem space down can be really helpful in order to help you do better discovery and more continuous discovery. This was a common thing that I did or worked with a lot of my clients on. So let me sketch this out for you. So let's say we have this big problem, right? Big problem. And this often means we have to do these kind of long discovery cycles because there's a lot for us to explore. There's a lot of space inside that problem space to explore. And this often leads us to come up with really big solutions. And this means that our discovery is very waterfall, right? We need to go and we need to kind of validate the problem space first. And once we've converged on that problem, we can then ideate solutions, and then we kind of converge on a solution and we end up with this really, really big solution. And what we often do is we work agile. So we break that solution down into epics and initiatives and user stories, that type of stuff. And then if we want to do any more discovery post this, let's say we haven't worked out exactly all of the specifics around that solution, because we're agile again. We're not trying to come up with a product requirements doc, a perfect spec, and high fidelity wireframes, that type of stuff. We can do some discovery during this, but the problem that we have is any discovery that we do, is focused, let's say we do discovery here to finalize the design and stuff. This is all solution discovery. Run out of space. This is all solution discovery, because we've already kind of done that problem space. And if we do challenge the problem space, then we're actually challenging this overall solution that we have, right? So what I see instead is I see basically teams doing kind of long-winded discovery cycles because they're starting with a very big problem and they come up with a very big solution, and they might still do continuous discovery, but the continuous discovery is focused on incrementally working through the solution. And it is very solution-focused discovery, not, both sides of the fence discovery, because we kind of locked ourselves into a solution already. Now, let me draw a alternative world. So let's say we get that big problem and we do what we just talked about, which was we break it down. We decompose it into its smaller components. What are those inputs that are driving that problem? And let's say we look at all this and we say, you know what, this one is the one we want to focus on. That's the biggest problem that we have right now. Now, this leads us to do just a little bit of discovery. Because again, we've already constrained that problem space, right? Remember that founder, we've gone from onboarding to how do we improve import, right? Like reduce the number of failures that happen during import, much more narrow problem space. There's a lot less exploration to do there. There's a lot less, discovery, and there's fewer, not just fewer opportunities, but there's fewer solutions that we can do in that space, right? And the solutions are much smaller. So we can do a little bit of discovery, we can deliver a small solution, and then we can go back and we can say, because again, this is a leading indicator, we can say, did this move the dial or not? Yes or no. And let's say that it hadn't, right? So it still hadn't, crossed the wrong one out, still hadn't moved the dial. Okay, cool. Let's do a little bit more discovery and let's build the next thing. And let's keep going and going and going until eventually we can tick that off. And then guess what? We can move to the next problem space, right? And then the next one, and then the next one. And eventually we should be able to achieve that big problem. You can see how this encourages better experimentation, more rapid iterations, and it encourages smaller and more continuous discovery, right? This is why breaking down the problem space can really help you with more continuous discovery. And this was a very common theme for me, for my clients. I spent a lot of time coaching in this, a lot of time spending time with teams, actually working them through the problem space, helping them decompose it, helping them to do more continuous discovery and continuous delivery. On that point, I actually ran a webinar where I went through dual track agile or continuous discovery and continuous delivery. You can find that webinar up here. I'll also put it in that pinned comment as well. On top of breaking down outcomes, I want to touch on 3 additional things that I felt like I was on repeat about during this year on product discovery. And the first one is to time box discovery. I got this neat framework. I actually learned it from a mentor, and then I found out he got it from Jeff Patton when I took Jeff Patton's Passionate Product Leadership course a couple of years ago. And I realized it was actually a Jeff Patton thing. So shout out to Jeff Patton for this awesome framework that I use all the time. But really what this is it's really illustrating that there's a relationship between how much confidence or how much risk there is or uncertainty there is and how much time we should spend in discovery. So what we can do is we can start to time box our discovery cycles. What's great about this is it stops discovery from going on for too long, which means that we can be more continuous with it. We can kind of call the time box and we can do another time box, or we can move to building something and we can get that continuous discovery and delivery happening. Now, if you do work in sprints, here's a tip for you. Don't change anything. Just follow your sprint time boxes, right? So during sprint planning, rather than just planning the stuff that you're going to deliver, why not plan the stuff that you're going to do discovery on inside your sprint time box as well? Even bonus, actually do a sprint review on those things as well, right? I think this is something that you just should do if you're doing sprints. Make sure you're doing discovery and delivery. You're not a feature team, be a product team, right? I think that's like a very simple change that you can make. Now, in order to help you come up with that, my second tip is to leverage tools like assumptions mapping. So assumptions mapping is going to help you prioritize your assumptions, which means that you can create a bit of a discovery backlog. Look at that. How amazing is that? Discovery backlog, delivery backlog, pull those 2 things into sprint planning, plan your sprint. It's super easy, right? So assumptions mapping is a great tool. I love it. I use it all the time. It is one of the top tools that I use. I recommend get in the book Tested Business Ideas, go check out David J. Bland stuff. He was the one who came up with assumptions mapping. He's got some amazing content out there around that. But the reason why I love assumptions mapping is it's going to help you prioritize those assumptions. What that means is if you couple this with that time box, we can work within the time box, try to test as many assumptions as we can inside that time box. And then at the end of the time box, we can choose, do we move to delivery or do we want to test more assumptions? And this, again, is a great way to just facilitate that more continuous discovery habit and just continuous discovery way of working. So I love it. I think it helps a lot, and it's a great way to facilitate continuous discovery. Now, my third tip is less of a practical tip. It's more of a mindset shift. What I really think is really powerful to do here is to just reframe how we think about discovery. What I often find with my clients is that they're thinking about discovery as really a design activity more so than a discovery or research activity, right? They think about it as like the output of discovery is like high fidelity designs and all these specs and like what exactly are we going to build? When in my opinion, discovery is not about that. Discovery is about getting confidence in a direction. So we just need to be directionally correct. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be, am I heading east, right? Like, is that roughly the right direction that we need to be going in, right? I'm not heading in the opposite direction. That's what we're trying to get out of discovery. Because if we do continuous discovery and continuous delivery, it means that we can learn as we go. As long as we're directionally correct, we can just keep course corrected within that direction. So hopefully those three things are super helpful for you. If you do want to know more about continuous discovery, if you want to learn more about discovery, there are links, as I mentioned, some of those videos I mentioned, some newsletter posts around that as well, all in that pinned comment down the bottom. So you'll probably think that after decades of content, plenty of people shouting about this, the success of numerous companies and startups that work this way, we would have left feature factories behind by now. But no, they were still the number 5 top challenge that product managers face in 2024 based on my content and my clients. A technique that I developed to help navigate this, which I shared numerous occasions, and all of those occasions, it kind of blew up, right? Like, so it turned out to be one of my top social posts of the year. It was one of my top newsletter posts. In fact, that newsletter post got picked up by other newsletters like Mind the Product and Age of Product. So they also reshared that and republished it to their audience. So it was very widespread. Safe to say, it's still a very top challenge that people are facing in 2024. The technique that I developed that I walked through was this one. I call it working forwards, not backwards. I might need to come up with a new framing for that because Rory Sutherland has this working forwards, backwards thing that is totally different to this. But I call it this because what we want to try and do is to walk a stakeholder forwards and try to unpack their thinking that way rather than walking backwards. So let me explain all this, right? So a common approach, and this is common advice, and this is sound advice, right? Is that when a stakeholder comes with a solution, we start to unpack what problem is it trying to solve. So we might ask them that question, right? Like, cool, great idea, but what problem is it trying to solve? Now, the challenge with this is that's going to work in some occasions, but it's not going to work in every occasion. There are going to be times where this is a struggle for those stakeholders, right? Maybe they're not used to working this way or whatever reason. I definitely run into barriers here all the time, and I'm sure you have as well. And what you end up doing is you end up kind of get stuck because like they can't work backwards towards the problem, and you are trying to get the problem because you don't want to just deliver that solution. So an alternative to this, one that I employ when I run into these challenges, is I try to work forwards, not backwards. I actually think it's also easier for people to imagine a future where their solution exists and not to work back into what problems that it's trying to solve, because sometimes those things are more intuitive, especially if you're like a founder or something like that. Like it's just intuitively in your brain that these things are challenges, and you're just not that great at problem framing too, because like problem framing is a skill in itself as well. So how does this work? Let me give you a real example of doing this with a client. Okay, so this is the real example. So we started with that black Post-it note, right? That black Post-it note right there is where we started. Essentially, without getting deep into what it is, and I don't need to go into what the product is because it's irrelevant, there's this really cool facial recognition technology inside health tech that can basically take like your biometrics. It can work out like things like your blood pressure and health stats. It's actually pretty cool. It's actually decent accuracy as well. It actually blew my mind. I didn't know this was possible. But basically you can imagine stakeholder went to some conference, they saw this thing or they saw it on the news and they're like, we need to use it, right? Like a solution looking for a problem. So sat down with the product manager and with the stakeholders, was like, okay, cool. So let's say that we deliver this. What does this mean for our customers? Like, what can our customers now do? Like, what changes for them? And they said very generic things to start off with. They were like, well, it's a better customer experience and it's quicker. And I was like, okay, well, like what else though? Like really dig deep here. And this is when they started to say, well, it's less invasive because right now we need to send the nurse to go get those biometrics off our customers, right? Which means that they need to schedule an appointment. A nurse needs to come out, they get stabbed in the arm because they need to take blood. It's really invasive and they need to take time out of their day. And, it's during office hours, so it's hard unless they're working from home or at least unless we can send it to their office. Like it's really inconvenient. I was like, okay, cool. There's some stuff there, right? Some stuff there. I said, okay, what does this then mean for us as a business, right? So if we solved all these things, if we made the experience better, it was less invasive, they didn't have to, take time out of their day, it was quicker for customers, what does that mean for us? And this is when they said, well, we deliver a better experience. And they also said, like, we reduce medical costs because it costs us money right now to send the nurses out. But the best one that came up with was this next one. They said, well, it's very common that customers need to cancel or reschedule because, it takes time out of their workday. Things come up. We all, things come up, right? Work comes up, those types of things. And we have data to show that if a customer takes longer than 30 days to convert, their chances of converting drops by 50%. So if we can reduce the number of times that people need to reschedule, we can bring that time horizon in under 30 days and we can therefore increase conversion, right? And we can kind of extrapolate these into high level outcomes around like costs and reducing end-to-end time and increasing conversion. But you can see what we've done here is we've landed on these really core problem spaces right here. And I can tell you now that this was like a 10-minute activity, 15 minutes maybe, tops. And I can guarantee you if I asked them, what problem is this solving? They would have just given me generic things like it's quicker, it's going to give a better experience. And there's no way I would have got the fact that customers need to reschedule. And as a result of all that, as a business problem, so a customer problem, pain point, takes time out of my day, I need to reschedule, that sucks. And then a business problem is the more that I have to reschedule, conversion rate just kind of plummets, right? So that sucks for us as a business. So this is the perfect intersect of business opportunity and customer opportunity. Solve that. Awesome. This solution sounds good now, right? But the even better thing is we're actually kind of anchored on those problem spaces. So the facial recognition tech, if the accuracy isn't good enough and it's not viable or not feasible or something like that, right? Then we could still pivot and find other ways to reduce those and solve those problems, right? We kind of unpacked that. So that is a technique that I used more times this year than I ever have. It kind of went viral in all my posts. I'll pin those posts down in the comments, as you can probably guess as well. I also did a webinar that I went through 5 other techniques that I use in order to navigate this challenge of stakeholders bringing solutions, not problems. You guessed it. You can find that down in the pinned comment as well. And on that note, that's a wrap for 2024. Stay tuned for the next part of this video where I look at 2025 and beyond, and we look at some of those trends. If that video is out, I will have it come up right here. If it's not out by the time you're watching this video, you'll get a YouTube recommended video, which should be awesome and amazing. I bet you that it is. And really from me, thanks for an amazing year. It's been my best year yet. The impact that I've had has been amazing. I'll see you in 2025.